Shalom and welcome to the One Pusik podcast, in which three rabbis from Englewood, New Jersey, each share an insight on one particular pusik from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Rabbi Chaim Pupko of Congregation Avat Torah, and I'm joined by my dear friends and colleagues,
Rabbi Akiva Block, Kihilat Kesher,
and Rabbi Daniel Goldberg, Eitz Chaim, the Englewood Stiebel.
Make it sweet for us again, like the honey that we tasted years before. Because each word is ours to own until we feel it in our bones.
All right, our one pusik for Parshas Toldos comes from Perek Chav Hey, pusik Chav Zayin, chapter 25, verse 27. The Avraham era is over. And Parshas Toldos begins explicitly declaring that we are now in the post-Avraham era, the era of Yitzchak and Rivka and their children, arguably the most famous twins in history, Yaakov and Esau, just beating out Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. And the pasuk says, Vayigdalu hane'arim, when the boys grew up, Vayihi Esau ish yodei tzayid ish sadeh. Esau became a skillful hunter, according to the translation that I'm reading. A man of the field, a man of the outdoors. V'Yaakov ish tam yoshev ohalim. But Yaakov became a mild man, a dweller of tents. I don't know why I chose this translation, but this translation says, became a mild man raising livestock. That's a little too non-literal for me in this pasuk.
But if I was going to go that direction, I would have said Esau was a wild man.
A wild man.
Yaakov was a mild man.
Oh,
right?
nice.
Like it's there.
Yeah, it is there. Now, before we dive into the pasuk, I'm just curious. I wanted to throw a question out there to you guys, and that is, looking back on your childhoods, do you see signs or something that you were destined to be a rabbi, or you were on that path to be a rabbi, or you think, looking back, yeah, I could have done anything?
I've basically always known I wanted to be a rabbi. I grew up in the house of a rabbi.
You were an Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim?
I wouldn't categorize myself as an Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. I was always drawn to everything about the rabbinate. Even as a kid, I enjoyed everything that goes into being a rabbi. The speaking and the teaching and the performative element of the rabbinate and helping people. And I love learning and teaching. So I've kind of always been drawn to it. I wouldn't necessarily say that the term Yoshev Ohalim is the most apt description of what it means to be a rabbi. Rabbis are very much out and about. And Yaakov, I think, is being described here as an introvert, although I guess we can discuss that moving forward. But I think
you're an outlier in that regard. I think the history of rabbis' kids has a lot of casualties, but not everyone, of course. Rabbi Goldberg, how about you?
I definitely was not on the Rabbi Block path. I was not a young man marked for Rabbanos. I think
Your brother-in-law was, though, right?
my brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Which one?
Rabbi Block. He was on the Rabbi Block path.
He was on the Rabbi Block path. That's right. Yeah, no, I think it evolved slowly. It was a slower evolution for me to a specific thing. There are things that I look back in retrospect and I say, hey, that really helped lay the groundwork and brought me along the way. But no single story. How about for you?
TABC debate team?
You're right. Mock trial was a very formative experience for me. It changed the way I looked at myself and my ability also to get up and lead and perform and do a lot of things, tools that I use till this day. But I don't know if at the time I said, oh, this is putting me on the path towards Rabbanos. In retrospect, I can see how it played a role. Yeah. How about you?
For me, it's a little bit similar to Rabbi Block, but a little bit different because I also grew up in a rabbinic family, lots of rabbis. But I wasn't necessarily looking at the rabbinate and saying, oh, is this for me? Is this not for me? I wasn't really thinking about anything. I enjoyed school, I enjoyed yeshiva, and I just naturally gravitated towards it. So I feel like Rabbi Block really saw things that he really enjoyed and really resonated. For me, it was much more subconscious.
I should also add, I'm also not good at very much else. So I don't know, even if I wanted to choose a different line of work, a different profession, if it would have worked out. But
I'm gonna come back to that in my Dvar Torah.
Okay.
All right, who wants to dive in first?
Esau is one of these biblical characters who I think often people think gets a bad rap. It's not entirely clear if you read the Torah what Esau did wrong. And we struggle sometimes when we read the evidence that is on the page to figure out why Esau was condemned or cast to the sidelines. But the first hint that I think we get is in this pasuk. Esau is described, in contrast, of course, to Yaakov, but Esau is described as Ish Yodei Tzayid Ish Sadeh. Esau is described as a person who is defined by, again, let's understand the contrast. Yaakov is described by an activity. He's Yoshev Ohalim. But Esau isn't described as someone who hunts. Esau is described as a hunter. He's Ish Yodei Tzayid. He's knowledgeable in the ways of hunting. Esau is described in characteristics and qualities that have to do with violence. And Yaakov is described in the opposite. And that perhaps is the antecedent, that is the seed that's been planted for the kind of person that Esau is. His essence was violence. In the 18th century, the Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Yecheskel Landau, I'm not sure how often we bring responsa literature into the One Pasuk podcast. So the Noda B'Yehuda was asked about hunting for sport. It's a very well-known, oft-cited tshuva. And the Noda B'Yehuda first goes through the halachic technicalities. He says, maybe it's tzar b'alei chayim, cruelty to animals. Technically, it's not tzar b'alei chayim. He said, maybe it's baltashvis, being wasteful. Technically, it's not tzar b'alei chayim. He says, maybe you violate the prohibition of v'nishmartim olen afrosechem because you're going into the forest amongst wild animals and you're putting your life in danger. That might be a problem. But then the important part of the tshuva is where he says, either way, regardless of the technical halacha, v'hinei ad ko dibarnu mitzad hadin. This is all just the technical halacha. Ve'omnam me'od ani tama al guf hadavar. But I'm just bewildered by even the question. V'lo matzinu ish tzayid rak ben Nimrod ve'Esau. The only people described in Tanakh as people who are hunters are unsavory characters. And Nimrod, who is maybe the progenitor of Esau, spiritually anyway, and Esau. Ve'ein bezeh darkei b'nei Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov. This is not the way of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Ve'eich yamit ish Yisraeli biyadayim ba'alei chayim b'lishim tzorah. How could a child of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov kill another living thing with their own hands for no reason whatsoever, just for recreation? And this is what it means to be a Jew. What it means to be a Jew is to be averse to violence. Violence is the way of Esau, and that's how Esau is described later on as well. Al charbecha tichya, Yitzchak says to him, you will live by the sword. The Jewish people, especially in modern times with the advent and the success of the state of Israel, I think sometimes struggles with this as well. We wield the sword, and we wield it effectively, and we must wield it effectively in the world in which we live. But it's important we never devolve into al charbecha tichya, that you live by the sword. We glorify our heroic chayalim in all of the right ways, but it's important that we not glorify violence, and we draw the line as Bnei Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and not wade into what it means to be the children of Esau. Esau is defined by violence, and we are defined as Yoshvei Ohalim, people who our instinct is against a violent life, and we should always remember that.
Yeah, that reminds me of an image I saw once. I was at a wedding in Israel, and my sister pointed out to me that there were a bunch of soldiers at the wedding, and they all went into the dancing, and they all left their guns at the table under the watch of one of the soldiers, and so you just saw this pile of guns. And
we usually just leave a pile of iPhones on the wedding.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought it was such a poignant image because I was also thinking about, I don't want to get political too much, but some years back, there was a wedding in Israel, and a video clip of it went around because some of the people were dancing with their guns and singing a song that was associated with people who have a certain political outlook. And it was very controversial, caused a real stir in Israel. Because that image of dancing at a wedding with guns is not us. And that's exactly what Rabbi Block is talking about. But that image of the guns on the side in a pile, I think is so poignant because we have to defend ourselves and we will defend ourselves. But exactly what Rabbi Block is saying, we're not going to be defined by what we need to do to defend ourselves. We define by dancing without our guns.
Very beautiful. I find this pasuk very inviting, and it's fascinating to see how the different mefarshim translate the word tam. Right? You joked about it in your introduction. Mild. What does tam mean? You find a gamut. You find ish tam meaning perfect. That he was born mahul, that he was born with a bris milah. He was physically perfect. He was spiritually perfect. The Unkla says givar shlim. He was whole. He was perfect. And on the other hand, you have, what I want to translate carefully from Rashi, who says that someone who is tam, mi she'enu charis liramos. What is he's not sharp to fool? Okay, I'm giving the literal but not colloquial smooth translation. Not sharp to fool someone. It's like a righteous naivete.
Right.
The opposite of
Youthful
cunning,
innocence.
kind of youthful naivete, a kind of
Yeah.
pious naivete. Again, we speak of our avos in lofty ways. They were great human beings and our spiritual heroes. But the question is, when we start out in Yaakov's journey, if you start out and you see him as perfect, then that sets you up for a whole way to read everything that Yaakov encounters, which is basically a person who at 13 was perfected. And life threw all sorts of complications at him. And it was, how does a perfect person navigate an imperfect world? That's one way to read Yaakov. If you start off by assuming we meet Yaakov and he is perfect. The alternative is to read it like Rashi, which is that he's bad. He's a righteous naivete, whatever you want to call it, young and a little bit sheltered, literally. Yoshev Halim sets us up for someone who is going to be much more dynamic. It sets us up for all of the subsequent parshios of Yaakov Avinu to be, how does someone who starts off in that place kind of learn how to navigate the world and correct for when the world actually calls upon you to do things that are a little bit questionable, tricking your father? And then how do you engage with Lavan, who is trying to outwit you and maintain your own integrity, at the same time figure out how to do for yourself and advance in the world and have something to call your own? And then wrestling with the angel and how we think about whether to encounter Esau, to run from Esau, to encounter Esau, and all these things, I think, are just a much richer journey with Yaakov. And you see someone evolve in a much more relatable way, and I think inspiring way. If we start off with him being Tom in the sense of room to grow. But I think maybe the more mainstream reading is Tom and perfect, and Yaakov was perfect, and he was always perfect, and he was born perfect. And then how do you navigate? It's just like two different narratives emerge from these two different readings in this puzzle.
Yeah, and that's why he earns the name Yisrael, right? Kisarisa, because you struggled, you strove, Fatuchal, and you overcame. I've thought about this idea in past years because whereas you have a medrash that says that Yaakov was born perfect, by contrast, you have a medrash that says that Esau, born hairy, was basically born an adult. He was born into maturity, whereas Yaakov had to grow up. And the symbol of that is that he needs his mother Rivka to put the fur on his arms to find that maturity like Esau. What you're referencing is the long-standing debate. Is our avos more heroic the more we can relate to them, or are they more heroic the more we can't? And I think many would agree that in a more practical sense, to look at them as role models, they're more heroic the more relatable they are.
Yeah. But I think it's hard to calibrate this right. I think that often the attempt to color in the avos in perfect, real, vivid three dimensions ends up diminishing them and diminishing them in our eyes, and it can lead to speaking about the avos in ways that I think is not just wrong, but it doesn't serve us well, because I think we're served well to have spiritual heroes. And I think it's also not true to text and our Masorah to go in that direction. At the same time, there is an overcorrection in the other direction, which is to imagine that every single act was fundamentally perfect and based on a titsos and a cheshbon in a certain sugya, and it was really a maflokas about dina de garmi, and you can way overcorrect in the other direction. And educationally, it's hard to get it right in the middle. Personally, it's hard to always get it exactly right. And as an educator at times, and I'm trying to give a shir, and I also I struggle with how to communicate that right balance. It's very balanced.
It's not that we're not willing to attribute wrongdoing to our avos. It's that they deserve the benefit of the doubt. That's the point. And which is why later on in the parsha, when Yaakov says, Anochi Esau v'chorecha, and Rashi says, it's Anochi, comma, ve'Esau v'chorecha. And that is clearly not the pshat. That is clearly not the pshat. What that Rashi really is meaning to teach us is the avos in their statements and their words and their actions deserve the benefit of the doubt. And it's our responsibility not to whitewash the avos, but to actually approach them in their word and their deed with a sense of generosity.
Yeah, at the end of the day, when Rabbi Goldberg was saying this, Hashem gives us this Torah with these characters. He's giving us these characters to learn from them. Now, obviously, you can learn from what people do wrong, but obviously we're supposed to learn, role model, be inspired by them. And so, again, you can still tend towards extremes, but you'd be missing the message of the Torah. The message of the Torah is that we be inspired and elevated by them.
All of us refuse to believe stories about our heroes that are unsavory. We refuse to believe them. I refuse to believe that because we want to preserve in our minds
Contemporary heroes, you're saying.
even contemporary heroes. You read in the paper about someone who's your example or your role model for something, and they've done something that's so incredibly wrong. Like you tell yourself, I can't believe this happened, because you have a picture in your head, lahavdil, about what this person is supposed to be.
So Rashi has an observation on this pasuk, which seems quite intuitive. It's citing a medrash, of course, but as straightforward as it sounds, I think that there's a deeper lesson. Because when the pasuk says Vayigidilu hanarim, they grew up, and their characters were Ish Yodei Atzayit, Ish Sadeh, Yaakov, Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. Kol Zman Shayu Ketani, Rashi says, as long as when they were young, Lo Hayu Nikarim L'Maaseim. It wasn't obvious that these were their character traits. Vein Adam Mendaktik Lahem Mativam, and no one was really paying attention. What was this one's nature? That one's nature. Kivin Shanasu B'nei Shloshes Shana, but once they became 13 years old, once they became adults, Zip Herish Labate Midrashos was Zip Herish Lavot Zara. This one went off to learning, and the other one went off to Avodah Zara. So it seems like a straightforward explanation of what this pasuk is trying to say. Vayigidilu hanarim, they grew up, and this is what they grew into, but they didn't necessarily start off that way. I think the reason why Rashi is pointing this out is because we might get the impression that they were born this way. Or we have this image of Esau as this hairy, adult, more mature-looking child, and the fact that they fought in the womb indicates that there's a difference between them. And so we might think that who Yaakov was and who Esau was were in their DNA. They were born this way. And I think Rashi cites this medrash to emphasize that no, they weren't born this way. They were born with certain qualities, but each one developed who they were on their own. And the idea is, and it's a belief I feel strongly, is that anybody is capable of anything. Yes, we have DNA. Yes, we have certain inclinations, things that we inherit, but we have the capacity to form our characters in any way we want, to a degree. And that I always talk to bar and bar mitzvah kids about this idea that you're capable of anything. And if you really want to pursue something and you practice really hard and you set your mind to it, you can become great at that. Some people feel that you have to be born a Bobby Fischer. You have to be born a Beethoven. And I don't believe that. I really don't. I believe anyone can become a Beethoven. I think there are certain things that are part of our nature, but I think a lot of who we are is nurture. And I think that's what Rashi wants us to take away from this, that it wasn't that Yaakov was born Yaakov and Esau was born Esau. No. They each had the capacity to go in different ways.
I think it's the Rambam who writes that anyone has the capacity to be a Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah. Because the pasuk says, "Lo come navi od Moshe."
For the Rambam, one of the Rambam's 13 Ikarim is
believing
in the uniqueness of the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. And that is, of course, true. And also a sincere belief of mine that we can be anything we put our minds to. But you could also read the pasuk, and some do, that Vayigdilu hane'arim, that phrase is actually meant to indicate, in the spirit of what we were saying before, the Yitzchak and Rivka were mistaken in treating these two children the same exact way, giving them the same exact education. Yaakov was a bookworm. Yaakov was a real school kid. And Esau, they stapled his tuchus to the base medrash when that's not where he was supposed to be. And Vayhi Esau Ishu De'atzayid, Esau ended up rejecting all that Yitzchak and Rivka stood for because they were so insistent that it be something that he believed. Instead of being indifferent, he actually ended up rejecting it. The notion of Chadoch L'nar Al Pidarko very much also comes out from this pasuk, that you really should know your child and educate them accordingly.
So I think what you're saying is a beautiful expansion of what I'm saying, because yes, there was a certain nature, according to that medrash, that attitude, that yes, Yaakov had a certain nature and Esau had a certain nature, but Dafka, because of the wrong approach to raising them the same, they weren't able to bring out of Esau something different that he could have become. And had they gone the wrong way with Yaakov, he could have gone the wrong way. So that's perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Respectfully, I disagree. I don't think that everyone has the capacity to be anything. I'm not just saying at the very margins of becoming obviously, if you built a certain way, you can't play in the NBA.
Right.
But I think that people have, let's say, a 15 or 20% swing. You could go in one direction, you can go in another direction, but you're given a certain set of tools. I think Hashem doesn't expect me to be Chaim Kanievsky. And I think I could be much greater than I am. I also could be much worse than I am. But I think we have a person, the Gemara talks about if you're born under a certain star, under Mars, you have a certain mazel, and you
Right.
can use those kochos. You have a certain affinity towards blood, and you could use those kochos to be a mohel, or you could use those kochos to be a murderer. I do think that we're given a certain constellation of abilities, and I actually think that Yaakov and Esau are like the original twin study, where we have the kind of it's probably somewhat controversial, but the doctors in the 20th century were very interested in studying twins to specifically peel apart nature and nurture, unspool those things,
Right.
and to say, here you have two people who are coming from living in the same home, and here you have, and yet they end up different, and you have Yaakov and Esau grown in the same home. I think because they were given a different nature from day one, they end up interacting with that home very differently. So to me, I take it in a different direction.
I totally hear that. I think I was very impacted by an article I read in the Harvard Business Review, which I think most every YU rabbi has probably quoted. The idea of like 10,000 hours that like they studied, and they found that if somebody spends 10,000 hours on something, they can become great in that thing. And that resonates with me. I hear what you're saying. And I think maybe the difference between us is a matter of degrees, but yeah, I definitely tend the other way.
I also meant to say, I loved your twins, Danny DeVito, Arnold Schwarzenegger reference. One of the all-time greats.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Make it sweet for us again, like the honey that we tasted years before. Because each word is our